Okay, so I have a fresh piece of paper here, and I want to practice making some boat shapes. The kinds of boats that we're doing today are simple boats that might hold 2 or 3 people. An oar boat or a dinghy of this nature, usually made of wood. And we're going to um, look for a way that we can draw them a little more effectively because they are difficult shapes to draw. One exercise that might help is using what we call a kind of lazy figure 8 to lay out the boat. Let's see here, we'll start just a small boat here. You see this sort of lazy 8 that I'm creating. The circle tends to be a little bigger towards the front. So if this is the front of the boat, I would make this circle a little bit bigger. Then you might think, well, what do we do with this? It doesn't look anything like a boat. It just looks like a racetrack or a figure laying down, figure 8. Let's add some lines to this and make it into more of a recognizable shape. First, we'll add the sides to our boat. Still really doesn't look like a boat. Let's add one more line down the peak of our figure 8. It kind of peaks right here. Bring a line straight down and connect these now across the bottom. And you'll start to say, hey, that does look a little bit like a boat. I mean, it looks sort of like the foundation for a boat. Let's erase this line that passes out of view on the other side of the boat, and you'll be able to see the boat in its entirety, right? So this is a 3/4 view, and you've heard me talk about a 3/4 view before, how it's sort of a view that artists tend to prefer because it's got a view of both sides at a slightly different angle, so there's some variety in the shape. It's nice, long, a little bit foreshortened. It really gives us a good feeling of whatever subject. It might be a house, a portrait, in this case, a boat. It looks quite good. So this is the basic shape for a boat. And some boats have squared sides. We can certainly do a squared side. We can do any sort of little nuance to this. We can add a little hook at the top, line. We can add oar locks, so we can add little things to this to our heart's content, and it's still going to look like a boat. Let's try one that's a little more foreshortened. So here the 8 is a little more open, right? Same boat, especially this front part is more open. Center line, side lines, and flat bottom. So the width doesn't change that much. However, the length of our boat is changing and it's starting to look more foreshortened. So if we have a boat that's a little closer to us and we're kind of looking down the length of it, this interpretation might help us out to create a more realistic feel to that boat, like it's turning. Let's try one more. Here our 8 is getting even bigger. Look at that. Bring this down about the same distance. Let's erase some lines. So this is kind of new for me too. I haven't really applied it in this manner yet, but I'm beginning to see that if I'm having trouble with my boat shape, this little technique is something that I can use to help me out. So now it's like the boat has turned again and kind of facing us. So we have 3 distinct shapes, and we can also flip it and go the other way. This is one way that we can create the shape of a simple boat and especially catch this elusive curve right here. Very difficult to catch. Okay, let's try boat and its reflection. Let's try another lazy 8 going this way. And we'll put on this side, we'll put on this side. This is going to be more of a sailboat, I think, so I'm going to make it a little skinnier. I erase the lines I don't need, and you see now the boat is facing the opposite direction, but still kind of foreshortened. And maybe we have a mast coming straight up. This is pretty easy for us to draw. And a folded sail on a boom. And now we have sort of a basic sailboat. And we can put rigging coming down to the sides. Let's reflect this boat to get an idea of how we might do a reflection. Well, the shape is almost identical. It's just turned upside down. And we kind of eyeballed the sight lines, the angles, try to reflect this angle here, etc. And we start to get the foundation for a reflection. Let's take this another stage further and start to shade it. I'm going to basically shade it with a flat stroke. Put this a little more here. We'll just build it all as one tone for now. So it almost appears like our boat is on glass because it's highly reflective. But typically there are some distortions in the reflection. I always look to the edges of the boat for some breaks in the edges or a little feeling of the water kind of moving around the edges. So I might, do something like this where the shape is disturbed a little bit. Making it darker is another way to create the sense of water, putting on a flat stroke as I'm doing now. Yet another way. But the reflection should always look a little different, somewhat different. Along the edges, the overall tonality should either be lighter or darker. It can be made longer. use these as guides, but we'll try to create the boat in a little different, the reflection a little different way. We can also use the eraser and pull a line across our reflection in this way, break the edge a little bit. Skinny lines are best. This is probably a little big. We break the edge of the reflection. Something like this. Let's give the bottom of our boat a little darkness on the bottom, because these boats in the water, you know, for such a long time, they get quite weathered, quite discolored on the bottom. It also acts as sort of a natural defining part for the reflection. And when we're doing the mast itself, breaking up the shape or making it into sort of a squiggly mark, as you see me doing, is a good way to reflect the mast. Imagine that this long skinny shape, this long skinny reflection, is going over some waves and something like that. And we have the boom here. I'm just going to make it sort of a flat shape that is reflecting the shape above somewhat. And then we'll put this coming out of our vessel. A little darker, a little more elevated. This is going to be a little closer to the boat because of the angle. That's more of a fine point, though. The major point is to get the bulk of this, or the main part is to get the angles relatively good. If you do that, I think that's 90% of the battle. So we kind of want this to feel all the same tone, even though this might be a darker part of the boat. We want it to feel all the same tone. I'm putting a little decorative edge on the front. Same here, all the same tone. That makes the reflection look like a reflection. At the same time, it makes it less powerful. But the more the attention, more of the interest is going to be in the boat itself. Inside, we just put a little dark. That's our sailboat. So there's some, there is an exercise that is good to think about related to today's subject. We're going to be drawing boats, and we're going to draw the reflections as well. We're also going to create a feeling of mist or fog in our scene. So we'll be dealing with that as a feature of the drawing today too. Okay. Let's move on. All right. First thing to do is get our major shapes onto the paper. And we have three boats. We have a backdrop of some fish shacks. And it's a rather foggy day. So let's place our main shape first. And coming out about halfway up the paper is a pier and its reflection. And there's the shape of our boat, right? Notice that the back is actually higher than the front. This is about the width, I feel. And then there's another boat. This one we're almost looking dead on, aren't we? So I'm creating a little figure 8 like this. Put the side here, put the side here, top here, coming down, coming up. Like I said, this is going to go a little bit higher. Or this a little lower. This one, we're almost looking down the length of the boat. Comes up to a point, that point comes down. Here's our sides. Sides are more angled, aren't they? It's almost like a kayak. Anyway, it's very foreshortened. And we have one more boat. This is more like this figure 8. One side coming down, another side coming down. We see a little bit of the back, see much more of the front. So 3 boats. A very subtle rise here. So take your time to find these shapes and execute these shapes to your satisfaction as best as you can. These are not easy shapes. As I said in the beginning, the shapes are rather difficult, the boat shapes. Like anything that has symmetry or that's man-made, it's a difficult shape. This is the back of the boat. Now I see. That's why it's a little difficult. This one is a little easier, I feel. This one pretty easy. So let's erase the lines that we don't need. So that we end up with only the shape of the boats. And then we'll place the reflections. Nice long reflections. I would say this is the main boat, wouldn't you? If we had to declare a major boat, I would say it's that one. The second boat and the third boat. Just like that. Three boats, the reflections, they feel like they're all sitting on the same surface. We even have a fourth boat back here. This is the profile. This looks a little bigger, in spite of its smaller size. It looks like it's a little bigger boat. The profile. There's that long sweeping curve. And then something like that with its reflection. We do have some lines tying off our boats, either into the water or coming out of the picture. Then what do we have in the back there? Back is a long piece of rock. And then we see this big bulky shape that kind of peaks right here and comes down and exits the picture. Interesting buildings there. We have a lot of perspective issues on the buildings. We'll forge ahead, even though it's a new subject. We'll kind of try and create something there, and I'll talk about perspective a little bit as we do that. When looking at this sort of subject where you have multiple buildings or multiple boats, I look for the lead boat or the lead building. In this case, the red shack almost appears to be sort of the major building. Okay, these lines that I'm putting are the pitch of the roof, basically a triangle that faces us. And then we see the side. So the pitch slides down a little bit. Even this, the roof line slides down a little bit. This is closer to eye level. It should be a little lower, shouldn't it? I'm going to leave it and just make it work by putting in these are poles or stilts that raise it up. So if the tide is high, there's no danger of water rushing in. We'll create the reflection here. Then we have a secondary building. The secondary building, actually there's a couple of buildings back there, all in fog, so it's a little hard to distinguish them. I'll start with this roof line because it meets with this line. It's easier for me to work with lines that are intersecting. And then I'll build the roof line for these buildings. Ironically, these are all 3/4 view as well. Oh, we see the front and the side in the same view. Smaller box shape building here. And then one last building. This is kind of full profile. And you see why architects and house portrait artists like that 3/4 view. This view is just kind of boring. And we have this shape coming up. And that's it. Those are the main lines of our shapes. We'll put that little house out here. I think I'm going to start by making these lines a little lighter because I want to do the shading should be kind of light in the background. I want to save my darks for the foreground. So just lighten these lines a little bit. Okay. All right, let's start in the background. We're going to just leave white in the sky for now. And with a very light touch and sort of a flat quality, I'm going to build up the shape just as a shape, a flat shape, only concerned about the edges, the contour of this shape. I'm not concerned yet about what's happening inside that shape. I'll address that a little later. I just want to keep a kind of smooth tone, light tone, all the way through this shape. Before I start to do any defining or refinement. That's the reason I went back and lightened the edges a little bit, lightened my marks that I used along the edges of the drawing. And I'm just using the flat stroke to keep it feeling flat. I want it to be flat, actually, at this stage. This is the effect that fog has on distant objects. It makes them all look very flat and almost like they're made out of the same material. In fact, I'm going to make the reflection the same. So keeping it very simple, very, very simple at this stage. right down to my boats. Even tied to the reflection of this boat. Very simple at this stage. I'm going to make it a little flatter by kind of blending the strokes while I can. Not really in a hurry. So with a light touch, I'm returning, especially to the reflection, blending that stroke a little more. I realize that I'm going to make the reflection darker than the subject. So I'm starting to do that. But at this stage, I'm not putting much weight on the pencil. I'm trying to keep it very uniform, in fact. You might as well stay back here for a while until we get the result that we want. Start to make this red building just a little bit darker. I think I'll leave the roof the same hue, but a little bit darker into the side of the red building. So some slight variations. This one I'm going to keep the same value, just try to make it a little smoother. I really want this to disappear into the mist. Maybe I'll even just kind of disturb that edge a little bit. Here we'll go a little darker. We're trying to create a feeling of thick atmosphere, and so when we outline a shape, that works against us. If we have the edge of the shape fading in and out, that's better for describing the sort of atmosphere. That's maybe too dark, but maybe not. We'll see. So all the relationships so far are very close together. The lights, the darks are rather close together. I think even though I want to go darker, I'm going to work from this point forward. Okay. Start to build in the value of this boat. Very light, but not white. This boat also very light. I suppose we could keep it almost a white. We'll do it even lighter than what we have. We can always make it darker, so let's instead focus on the trim, this boat, which is thin and darkish. And we just make that trim parallel the line that we drew. And we feed this into the reflection, which is quite dark. Surprisingly dark. But this dark is very useful, in this case, to make that white boat feel even brighter. And there's a little bit of trim to that too. Which I'm putting, and I've got to try and make it feel a little wavy. A little bit. Okay, so we now move on to this boat, which has a little more tone or color to it. We'll start with that. A flat end. And then the reflection. Which is quite dark. Pretty dark. And it's quite dark right underneath the boat. So I'm going to add just a little more dark there. I'm not going to work inside the boats just yet. A little darker to the side. Trying to find, follow that first line that we made, that signature 8. All right, then we have some stuff inside. Some buoys. Other stuff, we don't know what it is. Doesn't really matter. But we need to fill the boat with some tone, so this works out okay. The inside of this boat also, some tone. This boat, a little bit, but not much. Starting to come out. Let's continue to the, actually let's go up to this boat here. This one, we're not quite sure what to do. The camera has not helped us. We're just gonna, for the moment, put it in the same value as our reflection. I'm gonna kind of lose everything right there. Let's connect this to the side. This dark is so important to show off the boat. Both the dark and the reflection. Okay, it's coming about, coming out. Have some nice age, some rust where this joint is. Now we need to do something in the foreground. Look at that gradient. And it's quite beautiful, isn't it? So how are we going to do that? I'm returning to these shapes and trying to soften them as they come downward. Just softening the edges a little bit. So it doesn't appear like a hard edge. Hard edges in the water, not so effective. Real hard edges, they should be slightly soft, because we're describing the feel of the water. So I suggest we kind of go in a horizontal fashion, as light as possible. Especially through where our boats are sitting. As light as possible. So very, very light. It may even be difficult to see on the video because I'm hardly pressing at all. Still using a 4B, but this shows you, you can develop a lot of control, and really you don't need all of those pencils. You can certainly buy them and maybe make use of them, but I think getting to know a couple very well so that you can work with a light value or a dark value with any one pencil, probably preferable. So that's what I'm doing here, just very light in the water around my boats, right through here. Almost nothing through here. But then as we come down, we're going to try and control this and get progressively darker in a very smooth fashion. This all equates to adjusting the pressure and the pencil. So I am trying to really keep the stroke in this horizontal fashion so that when I meet up with another area here, it's not too obvious. It'd be better if I could really just go all the way across and make it very, very smooth. Tiring. Continue to build it. Transition is about here where I start to notice that it's getting darker. See the way it's going from the light to medium to now dark below here. Takes some time, but starting to appear now. That soft quality. And a gradient is so useful for so many things. In this case, we're defining a plane that's coming closer to us, the plane of the water. And in essence, we're kind of developing the surface a little bit, but more so we're developing the illusion that it's getting paler as it goes back. It's disappearing into the fog as it moves back. In the foreground, where we are right now, it's quite dark. And we're gradually approaching that. I hope you're more patient than me. I want this to be done. There's not a lot of, there's a good feeling at the end when you see how it looks, but there's not a lot of joy in creating this sort of mundane stroke. So it's a good exercise in patience. I've really had to slow myself down and prevent myself from trying to cover everything as fast as possible. This is not going to work in this case. Very, very gradually, methodically. Closer we make these values, the more they feel like fog. Okay, so let's build this one up again. It's paled a little bit. I think it can be a little more dark. It's better. So at this stage, from now, we're just kind of refining and adjusting, nothing dramatic. Polishing, refining, smoothing it out through cross-hatching. I think I'm going to go even lighter back here. You can go lighter if you feel you need to. Otherwise, if you're feeling, oh, that looks like fog and mist, then you should probably just work on the details. Let's try make it a little smoother. I did go much too dark back there in the beginning. Just dull everything down back here. Oh, nice little nuance is the rope that's hanging, coming down. Not a major deal, but a nice nuance. A little darker where it meets the water. Still want to go darker here. And I may, but I think for our lesson today, this is probably just about enough. This is something that we can do more to, you know, as we see more, we can add a deeper dark or some nuance. But I feel that the overall essence is here. This is a good use for our kneaded eraser. I'm gonna add a little tone to the boat while I'm here, because it's sort of rounding down to this dark.